Welcome to the SWIKE Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SWIKE Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. We're here with another guest host, Nora, who, if you recall, she's a HR business partner at Enbridge and kind of shares all her wisdom from an HR perspective. And today we wanted to talk a little bit more on the recruiting side because she's got a lot of experience, especially on the new hire and the campus perspective. So sharing some of the different programs that she's been a part of, and some of the kind of tips and tricks for those that are interested in making sure that they stand out from a recruiting process. So yeah, Nora, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of some of the programs that you've been involved in, and yeah, we'll start from there.
Thanks, Lukey, and thanks for having me join you on your podcast again. Appreciate it. And just to kind of summarize and give you some insight about my own personal recruiting background and some of the recruiting programs, specifically new programs that I've been involved in. I've had about 5 years of recruitment experience, mainly focused on the energy sector, but I've had the opportunity to recruit for a lot of different roles over the years at all different levels, starting from entry-level new grad roles all up to the executive role. And one of the biggest things that I loved about recruitment was actually new grad programs. So it's a lot of fun, the campus aspect of it, and just managing the program and also seeing entry-level career roles and hires come into our organization and really develop throughout the year. So that's something I always loved. And a few of the programs that I've hired in the past was specifically on the new grad side for engineers. So we have EIT rotations. I've hired a lot of EITs for a 4-year rotation to ultimately get their PN. I've done some CPA hiring. So again, similar concept to our EIT rotation, only with CPA. With new accounting grads, it takes about 2 years to get their CPA. So hiring them into a program that allows them to get that experience to successfully get their CPA. And I've done a lot of co-op and internship hiring as well. So in a nutshell, that's, the different types of programs that I've been involved in and managed in the past.
Cool. So what are some, or are there any key differences between them? So how similar or different is hiring an EIT or a CPA or even an intern? Because obviously an intern is for a slightly different thing. How similar or different are the process? So if someone is coming in as wanting a co-op or whatever, is the process that much different than someone as a new grad trying to land their first job?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we can look at the co-op and internships and, how easy or how difficult, the main difference between your experience as a co-op and as a new grad. Co-op and internships are a lot of fun to hire for. There's usually a lot of applicants for co-op and internship programs. So I'd say that's one of the biggest things, that if somebody is interested in securing some kind of a co-op or internship during their undergrad, which I think is, extremely important, just so you understand where you might want to go after you've graduated and to start building that resume. I'd say the key is to applying to a lot of co-op and internships and early on in the process. So there's usually specific times where large organizations have set dates where they'll post the roles and set dates where they will offer the roles. And a lot of times it's in advance of an individual summer or their next semester. And what I always would tell people is think about the organizations that you'd really like to work for and do a little research ahead of time on the dates, the co-op internship application process, and the time and the recruitment timelines, because that is going to help you plan out your application. It'll give you enough time to also plan for the different types of interviews that you might go through. And you want to give yourself that prep time because it's a new experience for you. You might not have as much experience in the interview or application process. You might need a little bit of help preparing, and you might not be that comfortable with it yet. So you really want to give yourself that time and plan. It will help you to do that. So that's something that I'd say about co-op and internships that also would be applicable to new grads, but I'd say co-op and internships a little bit more specific because it also depends on your semester planning and your school planning as well. And for co-op and internship roles, looking if you're asking the different types of roles I've hired for, all kinds. So, in the IT space, engineering space, and business, they haven't been very specific. It's just summer internships and winter or fall co-ops.
Sounds good. So yeah, that kind of echoes my experience. So I did led the campus recruiting program for one of the big four firms on their tech consulting side. And some folks would reach out, it's like, yeah, I wanted to get a summer internship. And they'd reach out in like March, right? But not realizing that the cycle often happens 4 months ahead of time, right? And so March is way too late. They've already hired everyone and they're like, oh my gosh, I missed it. So doing that research is so important. And every company is slightly different. For the most part, it's kind of like 2, 3, 4 months, depending on the cycle, right? And I think even as I talk to some of the campus recruiting colleagues, they're even starting to recruit earlier where they're going for, let's say, a summer internship. They're starting to recruit in like the November, December timeframe, whereas it used to be January. And it seems to be like a war on talent because the earlier you're in the recruiting process, the sooner that you can get like the really top talent. And then everyone wants to go a little bit earlier. So who knows that? So just make sure that you're aware.
It would also go for the other way as well. The earlier you start to apply, the more selective or the more opportunities you get, you might be able to actually get a role in your top companies that you've been interested in working in. So
that's absolutely true as well. So for co-op and internship, what's the process? So how many interviews would go through? Do you do like cases, like behavioral tech, like all those sorts of things that are involved? Like what would be involved in that? And obviously it's more on a general sense, so not any specific ones.
For sure.
But what should folks start preparing for in their co-op internship journey?
So for the co-op internship, at least in my experience and in the organizations that I've worked in the past and work in, there isn't an extensive interview process. So, you wouldn't go through necessarily cases or any kinds of online assessments ahead of time. What you'd really want to focus on is trying to differentiate your resume, standing out. So having that relevant experience and articulating a strong resume, because the applicant pool is competitive. In regards to the interview process, to prepare, I'd say really focus on your behavioral-based interview questions. If you can practice in front of the mirror or a friend, the interview process is typically just a behavioral-based interview, interview in person, and a phone screening with a recruiter. And that phone screening is usually super high level. They just want to understand your interest in the role, what you know about our company, and a little bit more about your availability. So that's for interns and co-ops. But our specific recruitment programs for new grads can get a little bit more technical and has a much more lengthy process, just because the investment usually in these programs is upwards of 4 years.
Yeah, I think that echoes kind of my experience as well, where actually if you really wanted a full-time job, the way to do it is to go through a co-op. Because for us, we would actually, well, not every time, but highly likely that you would get a return offer if you were in your like final term or whatever, graduating soon. And it's kind of like a 4-month interview anyway, because if you're any good, they would go through that. But to your point, it's less rigorous, where it's more behavioral. We will have technical interview components, but it usually depends on the interviewer and how tech savvy they and how tech detailed they want to get. But yeah, it's kind of similar. Probably 1, maybe 2 interviews at most. To kind of segregate into like HR and kind of behavioral functional. We might have like a senior manager type of interview as a senior leader if they really wanted to assess it. But yeah, so it kind of echoes that. So from your perspective, if we switch over, or did you have anything else to add for those that are looking at co-ops and internships?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. And never give up. Patience kind of always wins in this process. So.
Yeah, I think it's one where folks can get kind of dejected in the process when they don't land their dream thing, but that goes back to the starting early, and then you can kind of get to whatever. And if you don't get it for their co-op and internship, see if you can get it through the new grad hires later on.
Exactly.
So as we flip to that, what are some of the timings, the processes, the logistics? When should folks start thinking about applying if they're graduating soon?
Yeah. So, that's interesting. You have two different new grad roles. You have your basic entry level positions, and that's for every functional stream. So if you're interested in an organization, kind of keep your eye out on entry level roles. But we do have, and in my previous company as well, we had specific new grad programs. And what I mean by program is, for individuals that are studying specific professions that require some form of designation. So in my current organization, engineers and CPAs, so accountants, and I'm sure for you, Luke, in your previous career as well, you'd probably be looking at that for accountants as well. So those types of programs, it's a little bit more rigorous because the investment in order to get your designation and get you fully certified, whether it's, for example, through a PNG or a CPA, it takes a couple of years, and there has to be certain experiences that individual goes through professionally. So our interview process is a lot more rigorous. It usually, and this is in general for rotation programs and new grad programs, we have, aside from that application screening, the phone screening, we do sometimes have online assessments. And those assessments could be cognitive, they could be also behavioral questions. So we have online assessments, and that's also part of the screening process. And then we go through, usually it's about anywhere between 3 to 4 in-person interviews. And those interviews are a mix of technical questions along with behavioral-based questions. In my current experience, we don't do case studies, but I think that's just because we're not a consulting organization. So that skill set or that capability isn't something specifically that we might be focusing on as much as a Big Four, for example.
Sounds good. So yeah, it's definitely echo that, where it is a little bit more rigorous. And I was more on the consulting side, not the CPA side, so I never really hired for accountants. So they did their own thing. I don't think we ever did the online assessment thing. We tried to use a few tools in the mix in some of the years we were doing it. There were some screening tools, but they didn't necessarily work out as good as we could. We have, depending on the year, have had case interviews. But at the entry level, sometimes we don't do it just because of the volume that we need. Finding like interviewers can be so difficult. So depending on the particular target that we have, then we used to do it more, but now we're actually, we phase them out. I don't know in the new processes if they found like a good automation technique, but I know that for the undergrad side, they do less of them. Or if you're coming in from a master's perspective, an MBA, then yeah, you almost definitely will get some sort of case interview. But on the undergrad, it's a little bit less so. What about like the timelines and things like that? So what sort of timing should I start thinking about? Should I do it a couple of weeks before the day of when I graduate? And of course, that's not when you do it. Like, when should folks start thinking about applying for their job after graduation?
Like I said, with new grad roles, that timing also differs for each organization. Some will start that recruitment 6 months in advance. Some will start it the year before. And that's not saying, that's with the assumption that they're not actually looking to utilize their co-op and intern talent pool, right?
Right.
So I would say, during your last year, if you want to really start that job hunt, figure out what that recruitment process is and the type of programs, new grad programs that the organizations that you're really interested in have. And that might mean, going to an information session. A lot of times they have information sessions at schools because they know people are graduating, or just reaching out to a recruiter or an alumni or somebody that via LinkedIn. And I would say that, yeah, Luki, you're going to find some roles for new grads that are posted literally a month before you're set to graduate. But some roles aren't, right? And some roles are going to be recruited for in advance for 6 months. For the EIT rotation program, I've done that before. I've recruited, 6 months before, and it's a very lengthy process. So figure out, the organizations that you want to apply for, and start using the whole year to plan that out and keeping your eye out on opportunities to apply.
For sure, yeah. I know our cycle for the new grads, if you were graduating in whatever April June, April, May, whatever it is, then we would start recruiting for them the September before, right? So that would be, I guess, eight months ahead of the graduation. And then I believe they're actually starting to do that a little bit more frequently, or sorry, even earlier. So even starting in the August timeframe for some of the prime targets. And I know for those that are in master's program, some of them will even do like at the beginning of the program, where because it's only a year-long program, or sometimes it's a 2-year program, they'll try to start you like right when you get in. So not only are you starting your master's, your MBA, but you're also being potentially courted by all these different firms too. So it really goes home to the point of researching and figuring out what's relevant for the types of roles that you want, and when are the hiring, where is the hiring taking place on that side. So I think that's great information. So now that you understand the timings and you've started applying and all that sort of stuff, and you've brushed off your resume, and it's great. How do you make sense of all that advice out there? So there's conflicting and different advice of like, should it be a 1 page or 2, or like objective statements, should different fonts and PDF, whatever. So what's kind of your perspective, or what are kind of like the most tried and true ones that you would say, because you've had to hire for different companies?
Yeah.
What's kind of most important for you, and then what are kind of like the pet peeves like absolutely not,
Sure,
you want to make sure you don't do?
I'm just gonna say a general statement. If you're debating with yourself, excuse me, if your resume needs to be 1 to 2 or 3 pages, a recruiter would typically look at a resume and spend less than a minute on it, right? And that's when they're filtering it. So what that means is, depending on how many years of experience you have and how technical your experience is, the shorter the better. That's just the rule of thumb. So if you are a new grad, I don't know why you would have more than one page, because I'm assuming that your experience isn't that lengthy, right? If you are in your mid-career or later on in your career, maybe 2 pages. Again, it depends on how much experience you have, but rule of thumb, the shorter the better. The more concise and easy it is to read for a recruiter, the better your chances are of getting that resume looked at again.
That's awesome. And in terms of anything, in terms of like formatting and styles and fonts, so sometimes they have like the 2-page resumes. They have, the ones with like the little power bars of like 4 to 5 balls and stuff like that. What are your thoughts in terms of that, or like that laundry list of all the different skills you have? Are any of those relevant, important? Should I put color in it, or like what about all those things? Because those help my resume stand out, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think what's most important is when you choose a format that makes it, again, easy for somebody to read and understand quickly, maybe see trends or patterns in your experience, and it's concise, right? So when you're picking a format, don't try to pick a complicated format. And sometimes, I guess, colors are nice. I think that, at the end of the day, they are going to really pick up the resume that has the experience. Colors are nice, but if you do want to choose a color, maybe choose something neutral, right? I've seen some resumes with a lot of funky colors that are applying to non-design roles, right? And it can be a little off-putting. Usually for me, personally, better. Now, having said that, I think what's but also your LinkedIn, because that's kind of like your online resume. And a lot of times now, jobs are actually linked, job applications are linked to LinkedIn, and your recruiter might just prefer that, and she's actually going to your LinkedIn first. He or she, are going to the LinkedIn first before they look at your resume, right? You never know. So your LinkedIn is very, very important. It's kind of like your digital resume. So you want to make that consistent with your paper resume, because that is a big red flag. If there's some inconsistencies right off the bat, that trust is lost and that credibility is lost as an applicant. And you want to also make it professional, but don't be afraid to show a little bit of your personality, right? Whether it is the tone when you're writing a summary about yourself, or showcasing some of the extracurriculars you do, that could be could be very telling to somebody a little bit more about you, whether or not you fit in the company culture, and some additional experience that you might have and transferable skills, right? So those are just some things I'd say about the resume. If some people also always ask me about cover letter. Are the cover letters important? Are they not? I think that this is very controversial, but I will say this as somebody who's worked in recruitment for 5 years. for me, cover letters aren't actually important. I will probably only read a cover letter once I've selected and shortlisted a bunch of candidates and maybe take a look at, the writing style. But that already is a little bit more telling to me from, looking at their resume or even their LinkedIn summary, right? So some organizations do have a option for you to download a cover letter. And if they do, I would say do it. Don't take a shortcut. But if an organization doesn't, I wouldn't stress too much about it. A cover letter can also be very high level. And for the most part, it could be generic and you can update that based on different roles, I would say.
Yeah, I would probably echo that sentiment that a cover letter can often be good as a tie break, right? So if you have a whole bunch of good resumes and they're kind of very similar, but they're not really exactly how you want them, then comparing a good cover letter or decent cover letter from someone else can definitely choose one candidate versus another. But from my perspective, what I would normally do is I would take a look at the cover, and if the cover letter seemed blatantly templated, like "Dear Sir" or "Madam, I'm applying to whatever," I just don't bother.
Yeah.
But if one of them actually sounds like, hey, this person took some effort where they either name drop or talk about something specific to the role or whatever, then I actually give it a little bit of a credence and a little bit of weight to it. But that's, to your point, it's a bit controversial. It's a bit preference in terms of how they decide to do it. So yeah, I think I would agree with the sentiment that if they have an option for a cover letter, make sure to include it. But if they don't, well, you don't have to necessarily go out of your way to add it. But for me, I would still do it just because it could be that tie-breaking decision thing that actually sets you apart. So I think that's great guidance. So what about on the other side of pet peeves, things that you absolutely will like hate and saying, no, if any of this is there, then there's definitely a goner.
Yeah, I mean, something that you just said, the super generic, like "Dear Sir" or "Madam," if I am reading a cover letter, right? Or, and it should be a given, but I am going to say this, especially as a new grad or somebody in school trying to apply for co-op and internship positions, grammatical and spelling mistakes, even if you've reread your resume several times, get another eye to look at it because, you might be just missing something because you've been looking at it for so long. So make sure that is perfect as it can be. I've seen scenarios where somebody has an amazing resume and forgot to change the company on their cover letter, right? And it's such a shame because their resume is fantastic, and sometimes we look over that, sometimes we don't. But it's a big red flag for organizations. So that's a pet peeve. Then inconsistencies, and I think I've mentioned that before, inconsistencies in your resumes. If you're applying to a company for multiple roles, because they will have multiple roles usually, don't use different resumes because our applicant tracking system will track that. So that is a huge inconsistency, and make sure that there's no inconsistencies between LinkedIn and your resume, right? So those are just a little bit of my pet peeves, and bad formatting as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely echo all of that. What I would also add is what I call fluff, right? So it's basically those kind of words that you're self-starter, you're taking initiative, and blah 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 blah. It's like, okay, and what did that actually tell me about you? Like, give me an example, show me how you did it, and make it a little bit more concrete, and then I start believing you. But a lot of those words, yes, you use the thesaurus, and yes, you're able to find kind of the fancy way of saying it, but it doesn't necessarily help to add to that, right? So I think that those are some things definitely to be avoided. So.
Something that I actually did when I was a new grad was to expand on what you said. Show me how, or give me examples. And in some cases, what I actually did was, a couple of points below, and this might not work for everybody's resumes, but I actually wrote some specific achievements, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it was almost like a subsection in my resume, and it was formatted in a way that it still worked and it wasn't too wordy. And that helped actually drive the conversation with a lot of my phone screens and interviews.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen that done, but yeah, maybe that'll be all the rage for the new hires. I think for me, one recommendation that I'd have is, as you go through your the bullet points on your resume, is take a look at those bullet points and see if you can upgrade them, right? And what I mean by that is turn them from activities to achievements, because a lot of people will say what they did, but if you can actually put like a number, something, an accomplishment to say how many percentage or how many dollars or how many whatever that you've done, that can go more and add a little bit more than just saying I did it, right? So those are some of the types that I would often look for as well when we were kind of recruiting. And for us, because we were looking for the whole packages, we definitely wanted things like extracurriculars and things like that. We didn't want the person that had only like the 4.0s and the dean's list and scholarships and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's great. But if you had kind of zero hobbies or extracurriculars or whatever, then it wouldn't necessarily sit as well. And of course, if you have relevant work experience, you got to make sure to do that, even if it's not related. So if it's a part-time job or whatever, that can still give you some bonus marks, because I know that you can work. I know you can show up on time. I know you can do that. So make sure you include all that useful stuff as well. So what are some other considerations that or recommendations you provide for someone going through the recruiting process? How could they stand up? Are there other ways to kind of get to the front of the line from a recruiting perspective as a co-op intern or as a new grad?
Yeah, for sure. So, by just submitting your application doesn't mean that you're actually going to get a call back. I forget the statistic, but there was like a crazy small percentage of resumes that actually get looked and seen by a recruiter for every role. And it was something like 10% or even less. I just can't remember exactly. So there are a couple of things that I tell people and I've done in the past that have actually worked. So it's networking. And that's key. So whether it's networking earlier in the stage when you know what kind of organizations you're interested in, or networking during the job process. But ideally, you want to have already built those relationships ahead of time. And you don't only have to network with recruiters or HR professionals. A lot of time when it comes to applying, the pull won't only come, the pull of the applicant pool or the recommendation won't only come from an HR, but will also come from the business. So if you're interested in a certain area or function in, let's say, a Bell or Rogers or a RBC, I'm just giving very big examples like larger organizations, you might want to connect with an alumni that's in that business function, right? Or a manager, and just have a conversation. And that'll also be telling and give you some insight as if this is the right fit for you as well, right? If there's that mutual fit and whether or not you want to focus your applications on it. So that's an area, and that can happen through LinkedIn. And sometimes, if you're able to get a person's email off LinkedIn, schedule a chat or a call, that's what I'd recommend. That's what's really going to help you get your application at the top. And then also what you said, Luki, earlier, extracurricular and volunteer opportunities. You'll network, you'll learn, you'll meet a lot of people, and it'll help you give some more, it'll help you put some more experience on your resume just because of the limited time in the workforce that you have, right? So those transferable skills will really help you out when you are applying and you're starting to get into your first role.
Yeah, I think I would echo all of that. What I would probably add to it is those extracurriculars, those volunteer activities that you do, chances are you'll be encountering some sort of working professional, right? So whether it be a supervisor, and they're probably a volunteer as well, but learn about them, right? So they might not be doing anything that you're interested in, but chances are that their brother, their sister, cousin, or roommate or whatever has a connection or is working at a company that you would love. And because they've seen you show up and volunteer and come like every day on time, and you're always adding value, you're always putting up your hand, well, those are the type of people that we want to hire, right? So leverage those opportunities. If you have a panel of guests, get to know them a little bit more above and beyond. And that's a little bit of the bonus of organizing and being part of the leadership team to do this, is you get access to those folks. So leverage those opportunities. And what I would also add is the follow-up, right? Because oftentimes folks are at a networking event and they meet someone, but as a recruiter, I'd meet like 50, 100, 200 people in a night. And then I do it like 3 nights out of the week times like 4 weeks or something. So I can't remember anybody throughout the whole session. But it's the ones that are truly memorable are the ones that follow up a week after, a month after, a term after, a year after, whatever, and say, hey, Lukey, how's it going? Do you remember me and stuff? And hopefully add some value and remember the conversation and say that, hey, I remember that you like this or you were interested in this. Here's an interesting resource, article, post, or whatever on that. So building on that relationship and not just making it that one interaction and that transaction, that hoping that you're going to find that whale or elephant or bear that you're hunting for, but really planting seeds and growing them over time. And the sooner that you can do it, the better. But I mean, if you put it off until your last term before you graduate, well, this is probably the next best thing that you can do, right? But yeah, if you can plan ahead, that's always the idea. So, are there any other things that you would suggest for folks to kind of undertake or consider as they're new grads heading out into the real world?
You know, and I said that patience is something that's needed. I would also say persistence is key, and and I know that you and I've spoken about this, it's just keeping that momentum. And if you don't have a job, almost make it this your full-time job, because it is very competitive. Everybody's trying to get the same roles as you and graduating at the same time. So just keep your eye on the ball. And it's a process that you probably will experience a lot of rejection from. It's normal, right? And just make sure that that's not personal. It's not you. And just keep your eye on your goal. So that's some, mental health, have mental health checks, just personal ways to manage the process.
For sure. And from that persistence perspective, a story comes to mind. There was I think there's a senior VP at Microsoft, I believe he was at, but anyway, a big software company. And he said that on graduation, he had 4 offers out of 16 interviews after 800 applications, right? So that kind of shows like the numbers that you have to go through. And I don't know if that's typical, but it's probably in and around that range. So for those of you who have sent like 10 applications out, you need to get a little bit more than that and get going on that. But yeah, keep the persistence up and the mindset up. And it's one of those things, like if you ever get into sales, that every no is one step closer to your yes. so having those types of attitudes would be great. So I think that was a lot of great information. So thanks, Nora, for sharing your insights. And I think it'll give a lot of new grads some considerations that hopefully they'll start planning early in their process. And for those getting in, we'll give them hopefully some insights into being more effective in their job hunt. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back for future topics.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.